The real estate agent called it a handyman's dream. I called it a last resort. After the divorce, with my credit in tatters and my savings bled dry, the old Victorian on Hemlock Lane was the only thing in my budget that wasn't a cardboard box under an overpass. It was a hulking, Gothic monstrosity, all peeling paint and asymmetrical gables that frowned down at the overgrown lawn. The windows were like cataracted eyes, blind and filmy. But it was cheap, unbelievably, suspiciously cheap. The previous owners, the agents explained, had relocated suddenly, an overseas job offer they couldn't refuse. They'd left in such a hurry that they'd abandoned a few pieces of furniture. The whole thing smelled worse than the damp rot clinging to the porch, but desperation has a way of silencing the alarm bells in your head. The day I got the keys, I stood on the creaking porch, the massive oak door looming before me. The air was thick with the smell of decaying leaves and wet earth. As I slid the key into the lock, a voice from behind me made me jump. "You the new fella?" An old man with a face like a wrinkled paper bag was leaning on a rake, watching me from the neighboring yard. His eyes were pale and watery. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Dan, just moving in." He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting from me to the house and back again. "They give you the rules?" "Rules," I chuckled. "You mean like an HOA? Doesn't seem like the neighborhood for it." "No," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "Not those kind of rules. The house's rules, the ones for the basement." A cold trickle, completely separate from the autumn chill, ran down my spine. "Basement rules? What are you talking about?" He took a step closer, the rake forgotten in the grass. "Listen to me, son. The people who built this place, they were peculiar. They had their notions. The rules are written on the wall by the basement door. You read them, you memorize them, and you follow them, especially the first one." He looked at me with such intense, grave seriousness that my smirk vanished entirely. "What's the first one?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He leaned in so close I could smell the faint scent of pipe tobacco on his coat. "Never, under any circumstances, go into the basement." He turned and shuffled back towards his own house without another word. I stood there for a full minute, the key cold in my hand, the grandeur of my new home suddenly feeling like a prison sentence. Once inside, the sheer scale of the place momentarily pushed the old man's warning from my mind. The foyer opened into a vast, high-ceilinged living room, dominated by a stone fireplace big enough to park a car in. Dust motes danced in the slants of weak light that pierced the grimy windows. The air was stale and cold, carrying the faint, sweet scent of old wood and something else, something metallic, like copper pennies. I found the rules exactly where the old man said they would be. On the wall next to a door at the far end of the kitchen, someone had meticulously painted a list in a faded, elegant script. It was a bizarre, unsettling catechism. Rules for the well-being of the household. 1. Never go into the basement. The door must remain locked at all times. 2. If you hear knocking from the basement door, you must knock back 3 times and walk away. Do not listen for a response. 3. The reflections in the windows after dark are not to be trusted. Keep the curtains drawn from sunset to sunrise. 4. A place will be set at the dinner table for you. Do not acknowledge the other settings. 5. If you wake up and the house is silent, pretend to be asleep until you hear the floorboards creak. 6. The shadow in the periphery of your vision is a resident. Do not look at it directly. 7. You may feel a cold spot on the second floor landing. Walk through it quickly. Do not stop. 8. The house will provide. If you find an object that was not there before, a toy, a key, a lock of hair, leave it where it is. It is not for you. I read the list twice, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. This had to be a joke, a sick prank left by the previous owners, or maybe the old man next door was just a lonely nut job trying to scare the new guy. But the paint looked old, flaking at the edges, and the specificity of it, the other settings at the table, the peripheral shadow. It was too detailed, too weird to be a simple gag. For the first week, I followed the rules out of a sense of morbid curiosity and maybe a little bit of fear. I kept the basement door locked with the heavy, iron-banded lock that was already on it. I drew the curtains as soon as the sun began to set. I ignored the occasional chill on the landing. The house was unnervingly quiet, save for the symphony of groans and cracks all old houses make. But it was a manageable kind of creepy. Then the noises started. It began with the knocking. It was the third night, around 2 a.m. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it. Not a random settling noise, but a deliberate rhythmic tap. Tap, tap, coming from downstairs. My blood went cold. Rule number 2 flashed in my mind. If you hear knocking from the basement door, you must knock back 3 times and walk away. This is insane, I muttered to the empty darkness. But the knocking continued, patient and persistent. Tap, tap, tap. Fear is a powerful motivator. I slid out of bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I crept down the stairs, each creak sounding like a gunshot in the silent house. The knocking grew louder as I entered the kitchen. It was unmistakably coming from the basement door. The painted rules seemed to glow in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. I stood before the door, my hand trembling. I could feel a faint vibration through the wood. I raised a fist, hesitated, and then knocked 3 times, quickly and firmly. Bam, bam, bam. The knocking from the other side stopped instantly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. It was a listening silence. I stood there frozen, for what felt like an eternity, half expecting the door to splinter inward. But nothing happened. Remembering the rule, I turned and walked away, forcing myself not to run. Back in my room, I didn't sleep a wink. The next day, I tried to convince myself it had been the plumbing. Old pipes, I reasoned. They knock sometimes. But the pipes don't knock in a perfect mocking rhythm, and they don't stop when you knock back. The anomalies kept piling up. I'd set the table for 1, but when I came back with my dinner, there would be 2 other places set with immaculate antique china I'd never seen before. I'd walk into a room and catch a shifting, man-shaped darkness just at the edge of my sight. When I turned my head, it was gone. Rule 6. Do not look at it directly. One morning, I found a small porcelain doll with one cracked eye sitting on the bottom step of the staircase. It was old, its dress stained and faded. Rule 8 screamed in my head. It is not for you. I left it there. When I came back hours later, it was gone. The house was getting to me. The constant, low-grade terror was fraying my nerves. I was jumping at shadows, sleeping with the lights on. The divorce, the financial stress, it all felt trivial compared to the sentient, malevolent weirdness of this house. I started talking to myself just to hear a human voice. "Get a grip, Dan," I'd say, my voice echoing in the vast, empty rooms. "It's just a house." But it wasn't. It was a living, breathing entity, and I was an uninvited guest who had overstayed his welcome. The breaking point came 2 weeks in. I was in the living room trying to read when I heard a new sound. It wasn't knocking. It was a voice. Faint, muffled by the floorboards, but unmistakably a child's voice, singing a nursery rhyme. It was coming from the basement. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. The song ended with a soft, tinkling laugh that made the hair on my arm stand straight up. Rage, sudden and white-hot, flared inside me. This was enough. This was psychological torture. Someone was messing with me. Maybe the old man had access to some crawl space. Maybe the previous owners had left behind some kind of automated device. There had to be a rational explanation, and I was going to find it. I stormed into the kitchen and stood before the basement door. The heavy lock stared back at me. The rules on the wall seemed to pulse with a warning. "Screw the rules," I snarled. I fumbled for the key, which I'd hung on a hook nearby, my hands shaking not from fear now, but from a furious determination. The key was cold and heavy. I shoved it into the lock. It turned with a loud, rusty clunk that echoed through the silent house. I took a deep breath, wrapped my hand around the cold porcelain doorknob, and turned it. The door swung inward silently, revealing a yawning chasm of darkness. A smell billowed out, a cocktail of damp earth, decay, and that same coppery scent I'd noticed on my first day, but 1,000 times stronger. It was the smell of old blood and wet stone. A set of rough-hewn stone steps descended into the blackness. I pulled out my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam was swallowed by the gloom, illuminating only the first few steps and the packed earth floor below. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my bravado. "Is someone down there?" My words were met with a profound, absolute silence. It was a silence that felt heavy, expectant. I took a step down, then another. The air grew colder and thicker with each step. By the time I reached the bottom, my breath was pluming in the beam of my phone's light. The basement was vast, much larger than the house's footprint above should have allowed. My light played over a forest of thick stone support columns, their surfaces stained dark with moisture. The floor was hard-packed dirt, and the ceiling was a web of cobwebbed beams and pipes. And then I saw the markings. Every surface, the columns, the walls, the very beams overhead, was covered in them. They weren't painted like the rules upstairs. They were carved, gouged into the stone and wood with terrible, frantic force. They were the same rules, but multiplied, distorted. "Never go in the basement" was repeated over and over, the letters growing larger and more unhinged. Other phrases were scrawled amongst them. "It watches from the walls and it wears our faces, and the feast must be fed." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a prank. This was the testament of prisoners. This was desperation made manifest. I moved deeper into the cavernous space, my light bouncing erratically. I saw piles of old furniture, trunks and junk, all covered in a thick layer of dust. And then I saw something else. In a corner, partially hidden behind a column, was a small, clean space. A little table and 2 chairs were set up, like for a child's tea party. On the table sat the porcelain doll I had seen on the stairs. Its one good eye seemed to follow me. A wave of pure, undiluted dread washed over me. I needed to get out, now. I turned to run back to the stairs, and my light swept across the far wall. I froze. The wall wasn't made of stone. It was made of something else, something organic and dark, veined with pulsing, root-like tendrils that throbbed with a faint, sickly light. And embedded in this wall, like insects in amber, were faces. They were human faces, contorted in eternal screams of terror. Their eyes were wide and milky, their mouths frozen open. They were pressed against the surface from the inside, as if trying to push through. Some were skeletal, just skin stretched tight over bone. Others looked fresher, their features still recognizable in their final agonized moments. I recognized one of them. It was a face from a missing persons poster I'd seen in the town's post office. A young woman who had vanished a year ago. My mind simply broke. I couldn't process what I was seeing. This was a nightmare made flesh, a horror so profound it defied logic. A soft, wet sound came from the wall. One of the faces, a man with a thick beard, was moving, his jaw unhinged, and a low, guttural whisper slithered out, echoing in the vast, silent space. "You should not be here." That's when I saw it. The wall was shifting. The tendrils of light pulsed faster, and the entire surface began to undulate. The faces writhed, their silent screams becoming a chorus of muffled, wet moans. The thing in the wall was waking up. I stumbled backward, my phone falling from my nerveless fingers. It hit the dirt and went out, plunging me into absolute suffocating darkness. Panic seized me. I scrambled on my hands and knees, blind, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. I could hear it now, a slithering, scraping sound, moving through the darkness towards me. The coppery smell was overwhelming, mixed with the stench of opened graves. Thump. Something heavy landed on the dirt nearby. Scrape. Slither. It was close. I could feel a cold, foul breeze on my face. I could hear a wet, rhythmic breathing. I screamed and scrambled forward, my hands clawing at the dirt. My fingers brushed against cold stone. The steps. I hauled myself up, taking the steps two at a time, driven by pure animal instinct. I burst through the basement door, slammed it shut, and fumbled for the key. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get it into the lock. Thump. The sound from the other side of the door wasn't a knock. It was a heavy, powerful impact that made the solid oak door shudder in its frame. I turned the key. The lock clicked home. I didn't stop. I ran through the kitchen, through the living room, and out the front door, not even bothering to close it behind me. I ran until my lungs burned, collapsing on the damp grass of my neighbor's lawn, sobbing. The old man found me there. He didn't look surprised. He just helped me to my feet and led me into his warm, brightly lit kitchen. He gave me a glass of whiskey, and I drank it in one burning gulp. "You went in," he said. Not a question. I could only nod, tears streaming down my face. What is it?" I managed to choke out. He sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. "No one knows for sure. It was here before the house. The folks who built this place, they weren't peculiar. They were custodians. They built the house to contain it, to feed it just enough to keep it quiet. The rules were their instructions, a way to live with it, a way to survive." "Feed it?" I whispered, the horror dawning on me anew. The other settings at the table, the cold spot, the shadow. It's always there, Dan. It's always hungry. The rules keep it pacified. They stop it from coming upstairs to find its own food. "The people in the wall," I said, my stomach churning. "The ones who didn't follow the rules," he said grimly, "and the ones it lured it in from the outside when it got too hungry. It can mimic voices, create illusions. It makes you see what you want to see, hear what you need to hear. It made you hear a child, didn't it?" I thought of the singing, the laughter, a lure. I had been lured. I moved out that night. I left everything I owned in that house. I live in a small, sterile apartment now, surrounded by the noise of the city. I sleep with all the lights on, but it's not over. Last night, I woke up to the sound of knocking, not at the door. 3 soft, distinct knocks on my bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. And this morning, when I went to make my coffee, I found a place set for me at my small Formica table, and another place set directly across from me with a chipped antique teacup I've never seen before. It knows where I am. The rules don't just apply to the house. I broke the first and most important one, and I let it out. Or maybe I just let it know that I was a viable source of food. I've started seeing the shadow again, always just at the corner of my eye. I feel the cold spot in the hallway outside my apartment door. It's here with me. It followed me home. So a word of advice. If you ever find a deal that seems too good to be true, if the house has a list of rules painted neatly on the wall, listen to them. Follow every single one. But most of all, remember the first rule. The one rule that must never, ever be broken. Never go in the basement.